Story of a serial killer, a secret message, and 51 years of silence. In 1969, a killer sent a coded message to a newspaper in San Francisco. It was 340 characters long, full of strange symbols, crosses, circles, letters flipped backward. The FBI tried to crack it. The NSA tried. Navy cryptographers tried. Nobody could. For 51 years, that message sat unsolved. A taunting puzzle from a man who was never caught. Then, in December 2020, 3 ordinary people did what the most powerful agencies in the world could not. They broke the code. And what they found inside was exactly the kind of message you'd expect from a man who called himself the Zodiac. To understand why this cipher mattered, you have to go back to the summer of 1969. Northern California was terrified. A man had been going after strangers at random, couples parked at night, a cab driver just doing his job. The incidents were sudden, unprovoked, and seemingly without motive. But what made this case unlike anything law enforcement had ever seen was what came after the incidents. The killer started writing letters, not to the police, to the newspapers. He called himself the Zodiac. He drew a crosshair symbol at the bottom of every letter, and he dared the press to print his words, threatening to strike again if they didn't. Along with those letters, he sent ciphers, coded puzzles made of symbols that supposedly contained his identity. The first cipher, 408 characters long, was cracked within a week by a schoolteacher and her husband. It contained a chilling message with dark claims about the afterlife, but it did not reveal his name. Then came the second cipher, the one known as Z340. This one was different. It was shorter, stranger, and it seemed almost impossible to decode. The Zodiac had learned from his mistake. He made this one harder, much harder. Between 1968 and 1969, the Zodiac claimed responsibility for incidents across the San Francisco Bay Area. 5 victims were confirmed. He claimed many more. He taunted the police in his letters. He taunted the public on live television, or at least someone claiming to be him called into a local TV show. The case consumed Northern California. Thousands of tips poured in. Sketches were drawn. Suspects were questioned. One man in particular, Arthur Lee Allen, was investigated repeatedly. But nothing stuck. No arrest was ever made. And through it all, the Z340 cipher sat there, unsolved. A locked door that might hold the answer to everything. What did the message say? Did it contain the killer's real name? Was it a confession? A map? A clue? Nobody knew. And for decades, nobody came close to finding out. In 2006, a software developer from Virginia named David Orenchak became fascinated with the Z340. He wasn't a professional cryptographer. He was just someone who loved puzzles. He started a website. He studied the cipher obsessively. He tried thousands of approaches. Nothing worked. But Orenchak didn't give up. He kept going, year after year. Then, in 2020, he connected with 2 other people who had the same obsession. Sam Blake, a mathematician from Australia, and Jarl van Eyck, a warehouse worker and self-taught programmer from Belgium. 3 people, 3 different countries. None of them were FBI agents or government codebreakers. They were just ordinary people who refused to let a 51-year-old puzzle beat them. Van Eyck had built a program called AZ Decrypt, designed specifically for cracking complex ciphers. Blake used advanced mathematics to rearrange the cipher's 340 symbols into 650,000 different possible patterns. They sent batch after batch through the software. Most results came back as nonsense, random letters, dead ends. But something about the way this cipher was built gave them a theory. The Zodiac hadn't just scrambled the letters. He had layered two techniques on top of each other: a substitution cipher and a transposition cipher. That's why nobody had been able to solve it. You had to undo both layers in the right order. On December 3rd, 2020, Orenchak was sifting through another batch of results when two phrases jumped out of the noise. He locked those phrases in place and ran the program again. And then he saw it. Words. Real words. Forming real sentences. He later described that moment as the most shocking experience of his life. After 14 years of trying, the cipher was speaking. But here's what nobody expected. The message didn't contain the Zodiac's name. It didn't reveal where he lived. It wasn't a confession or a map. Instead, it was a taunt. Just like everything else the Zodiac had ever written. The decoded message talked about the afterlife, about not being afraid of death, about claiming dominion over others beyond the grave. It even referenced that TV call-in show with the Zodiac, claiming that wasn't actually him on the program. After 51 years of waiting, the message turned out to be more of the same disturbing, cryptic rambling. The cipher was a locked door, and behind it was just another wall. On December 5th, 2020, the FBI officially confirmed the solution was correct. The three codebreakers published their full methodology. They shared everything: the math, the software, the process. And they made something very clear. This wasn't just their achievement. It was the result of a decades-long community effort. Hundreds of amateur codebreakers had contributed ideas, theories, and failed attempts that slowly narrowed the path. Orenchak, Blake, and Van Eyck stood on the shoulders of all those who came before them. The Zodiac killer was never identified. To this day, the case remains officially open. Two more ciphers exist, but they're too short to be reliably solved. Some investigators still believe Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac. Others have proposed different suspects over the years. DNA technology has advanced, but a confirmed match has never been announced. Here's what stays with me about this story. The FBI couldn't solve it. The NSA couldn't solve it. The most advanced intelligence agencies on the planet walked away empty-handed, and then a software developer, a mathematician, and a warehouse worker cracked it from 3 different corners of the world. Not because they had better resources, but because they had patience, obsession, and the belief that ordinary people can solve extraordinary problems. The Zodiac wanted to be remembered as someone to be feared. He wanted his ciphers to be his legacy, a permanent riddle that proved he was smarter than everyone. But in the end, 3 strangers proved him wrong. They dedicated their work to the victims and their families, because this was never about the killer. It was about following the red threads, the small, hidden connections that most people overlook. That's what we do here. We pull on those threads, one case at a time, one story at a time. If that sounds like something you want to be a part of, subscribe to the Red Threads. The next story is already waiting.